you again for joining us, Jenica. It's awesome to be able to talk to you today and let our church family hear your story and how you're facing the challenges that are unique to this COVID-19 season. So could you go ahead and start and tell us about where you go to school and what grade you're in?
So I'm a senior at Shawnee Mission Northwest High School.
Okay. Now, the coronavirus has obviously impacted graduation. So can you tell us about when you received the news and how you're really processing that?
So I found out actually just a couple of days ago about a graduation plan that the Shawnee Mission School District is doing. And so there's two options. One of them is having an in-person graduation in late July, and then the other one is like online. And they're making that decision mid-June. And so that's really impacted my patience. I feel like I'm trying not to get my hopes too high because I don't want that to be something that gets taken away if it's just the online graduation. But I feel like it's definitely hard to process with patience.
So your generation is definitely more tech savvy than any of the rest of us, but I'm curious about your perspective in this season. Like, are you feeling like, yes, let's embrace technology, or are you just kind of fed up with all of it?
I personally am not a huge technology person. I like hands-on learning with paper and just seeing my teachers face to face. It's definitely a lot different being on Zoom calls with like my teachers and classes. And I feel like it takes a lot away from just being in the classroom. I'd much rather be in school and talking face to face with people.
Yeah. You're a very social person. I can tell you love.
Yeah, I literally I didn't realize how extroverted I was until the stay-at-home order happened, and I'm just, yeah, it definitely changes your perspective.
Yes, same. I thought I was an introvert, and I thought wrong. So I'm learning. Can you tell me a little bit about that transition? You know, one day you're expecting to return to school and finish out your senior year, and then the next day you find out, no, actually, that's not going to happen. Can you tell me how that felt and how you processed that?
Yeah, so actually on the last day, I didn't know it at the time, but on the last day that I went to school, it was like a half day. And so there actually wasn't a lot of people at school that day. And I remember I went to open lunch with one of my best friends, and we got back to school and we were like, in case this is the last time we ever come back here, let's take a picture together. And so we did, and neither of us really thought that it would be the last day. But then our teachers announced, like, grab your textbooks, grab anything you might need just in case something happens. And so we were just like, is this really actually a possibility? And then later that week, we found out that it was the last day. I was actually with a bunch of my friends at Northwest, practicing baseball and softball, and we got the call, and it was just really disappointing and just hard to believe and hard to take in for a while.
So what kind of keeps you up at night? Is there anything that's making you restless right now?
The lack of control is definitely what makes me the most restless right now. I'm definitely someone that has a really strict, busy schedule, and I like to write everything down and be super organized with that. And I always have my planner with me so that I can write in things. And I haven't even looked at my planner in the last month and a half because there's nothing to write down and there's nothing to really do. And so that's definitely been a challenge. Is I feel like I have no control over anything that's happening. And so it's definitely made me put my trust in God with that for sure.
Okay. So that kind of leads into my next question, which is, what is God doing in your life right now? What is he teaching you? What is he speaking to you?
So initially I was super sad, and I wasn't necessarily mad at God, but I was very frustrated with the whole situation. I remember I would pray to God and I would be like, why are you taking away my last few months of high school? Like, this was supposed to be like the best few months of my life. And I learned pretty quickly that it was good that I was sad, and it was God's blessing in disguise saying, hey, you're sad because I've blessed you with all these good moments and memories. And so I turn that sadness into gratefulness, because I know that I'm so sad and frustrated because I've been blessed with so much. And also, like, our pastors repetitively talk about how we're human beings, not human doings. And I feel like this whole situation has been a lesson from God for us to slow down. And I know that I like want to go, go, go and be rushed all the time and be busy. And I like that. I like doing that. It makes me feel like I'm accomplishing things. But I feel like slowing down has taught me that not everything in life is, everything that we think is important isn't. And we don't need as much to survive as what we think we do. And so I think just simplifying and slowing everything down has really been a good lesson. Um, and then also, like, while I've been reading through my Bible, since I've had a lot more time to work through that, it's definitely been made clear that God's perfect plan is in place and it's still working. And it's really been hard for me to understand that, because like my plan is straightforward and small, and I can only see so much in the future, and I think I know everything, but God's plan is just so much more vast than our understanding. And so I feel like just understanding that God's perfect plan is still in place and it's still perfect according to him really helps me get through the day.
That is such a good word, Jenica. That is amazing. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you today. I really appreciate your insight, and we'll be praying for you as you make these next big transitions.
Hey, welcome to Community. We're so excited to have you with us today to worship. If you're new to worshiping with us, you can follow the link on the screen, and that will take you to a place where you can let us know who you are, and we can follow up with you to connect you to some of the great ministries we have going on here at Community Covenant Church. If you've been with us for a while, you can follow this link that you'll see on the screen, and that will take you to our online registry that will just let us know that you were here today. A lot of us are going through tough times, and we just want to talk to somebody. If you can follow this number on the screen, you can call that in. That will leave a message for the on-call pastor. There's an on-call pastor that's available each day. If you call into that number, you can leave a message, and that on-call pastor will get back to you just as soon as they can. And then we are so appreciative to everyone who has been contributing to the ministry of Community Covenant financially during this time. We know it's not an easy time to do that, but if you feel led to give financially, you can follow this link as a way to give online. And again, we do so much appreciate your generosity. So with that, let's just continue to worship together. We're so glad that you're here.
I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. And I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. And I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah speaks a better word, speaks a better word. Sing it out. It's singing out in life. It's shouting down the line. Oh, it echoes through the night. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. Yeah. Speaks a better word. Your blood, robe of righteousness. Your blood's our hope and my defense. Your blood forever covers me. Oh, forever covers me. Yeah. It's singing out in light. It's shouting down the lines. It echoes. Oh, it echoes through the night. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. Speaks a better word. It's calling out. It's calling out my name. It's breaking every chain. It's making all things right. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. It speaks a better word. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. He's speaking life over us. Sing this. It's rewriting my history. Believe it. It covers me with destiny. It's putting all things right. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. It's rewriting my history. It covers me with destiny. Yes, it does. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. It's rewriting my history. Yeah, yeah. It covers me with destiny.
This week I was wondering what an average Israelite might have been experiencing as they were traveling to the Red Sea. I began to think about what they would have written to God, or how they would have processed or experienced all that they were doing as they were heading towards the Red Sea. And so as we begin today, I wrote an imaginative journal writing that I want to read to you of maybe what they were feeling and processing as they were not knowing what lie ahead of them. God, I know you have been with us in Egypt. I saw firsthand how you worked through each of the plagues. I saw how you passed over our homes, how you saved our firstborn children. I know that you were the one that allowed Pharaoh to let us go. I should be praising you right now. But instead of praises, I'm filled with doubts. I'm filled with worries. I know every way that you've been acting and intervening is because you love us, because you care for us. But right now, I can't even remember all the miracles that you have done. I can't remember it, and I can't see it, and I can't feel it. All I feel is scared and alone. God, I just want to go back to Egypt, even though it was terrible there. I was a slave. I had no freedoms. I worked long, beastly hours. God, even because of all that, I still knew what I could predict every day. I knew what my life was. And now out here, I don't know what to expect, and I have no clue what is going on. All I see is a sea in front of me. It's too big and too far and wide for us to cross. And behind me is the Egyptian army. And there's too many of them. We're trapped. The situation is impossible. God, why did you leave us out here just to abandon us now? Was this all just a game to you? Is this a punishment for our lack of obedience and faith? God, why did you leave us when we needed you most? Why aren't you doing something right now? I need you to act again, and I need you to do it quickly. Don't you care about us? Don't you care about me? I don't know what to do, God. It's just too difficult. It's too hard. I can't move on anymore. I just can't.
As you hear these thoughts and feelings expressed, do you hear any of your own current story in what was just read? We're not trapped between the Red Sea and mountains around us and an army coming up behind us to do harm to us, but we're in a situation that feels out of control at times, doesn't it? We're in a situation that sometimes seems impossible. We're in a situation where there's no playbook, there's no manual to help us walk through this season. This is a new situation for all of us, and many people are asking the questions that Pastor Jessica put words to in her imaginative journal. And that's why this story that we're looking at these weeks, the story of the people of Israel being trapped in what looked like a hopeless situation, speaks to you and to me and to our situation today. What we're seeing each week is that when we as believers in God, when we as followers of Jesus are in a hard situation, God will make a way. God will make a way for us through the difficulty. And so as we talked a couple weeks ago, the first step of God making a way in your life and mine in the midst of this situation is to remind ourselves that when we are in a difficult place that God has allowed us to be in, God is at work to bring good out of a bad situation, and He'll do that for His glory. And then as we saw last week, the second step of God making a way in our life is to acknowledge that when you and I have bad stuff going on in our life, we're going to be okay if we keep our eyes on the Lord and we pray. Well, today we learn a third lesson of how to deal with the stuff that happens in our life that's not good. And that is that God is going to work within us and use this situation in our lives if we will stay calm and confident in him, if we'll give him time to work, and then we take the next step forward in faith. Now, at first, the people of Israel didn't do that when they were there at the Red Sea. They were filled with all kinds of worry, all kinds of fear, and they're overcome by it. Look at how they initially react in Exodus 14:10 through 12. It says, as Pharaoh approached, the people of Israel looked up and panicked when they saw the Egyptians overtaking them. They cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Why did you bring us out here to die in the wilderness? Weren't there enough graves for us in Egypt? What have you done to us? Why did you make us leave Egypt? Didn't we tell you this would happen while we were still in Egypt? We said, leave us alone. Let us be slaves of the Egyptians. It's better to be a slave in Egypt than a corpse in the wilderness." They're filled with worry and fear. Well, let's first look at worry today, because have you found yourself in this situation going on around us these past couple months at times worrying? You know, I think if worry was a professional sport, some of us might be the MVP, the most valuable player of our team. It is so hard not to worry when trouble looms all around us. The word worry has a number of definitions in the dictionary, and the one that I want to use today is the definition that says worry is to torment oneself with cares and anxieties. Every time we worry, we're tormenting ourselves. No one is doing it to us. We are doing it to ourselves. When we worry, when we allow our minds to dwell on difficult circumstances and overwhelming fears, we're facing situations that may actually happen, or maybe potential situations that will never occur. You and I don't know, but when we worry about those things, it prevents us from sleeping, it impacts our relationships, it affects our appetites, it impacts our performance at work. Think about it. Imagine with me that worry is a fire. And the more we allow it to occupy our thoughts, the more we are pouring fuel on that fire. And the more we do this, the bigger the worry fire gets. And the bigger that fire is that we need to put out later. And so how do you and I stop this kind of cycle? How do you and I not let worry have its way in our lives? How do we replace those uninvited worry thoughts with other thoughts that will give us peace? Well, we learn the third lesson that this story of the people at the Red Sea teaches us, and it's that third step of God making a way in our life. And it's to stay calm and confident and give God time to work and take the next step forward in faith. Look at Exodus 14:13. Moses told the people, "Don't be afraid, just stand still." Some of your translations say stand firm. "And watch the Lord rescue you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord himself will fight for you. Just stay calm." Stay calm and confident, he's saying. Give God time to work. It's like Psalm 37:7 says, "Be still in the presence of the Lord and wait patiently for him to act." If we do that, worry will be unnecessary. Think about it. When you and I have put our faith in Jesus and we've asked God to forgive us of our sin and God's presence is living within us, he tells us that he will be our refuge and our strength and our fortress in difficult times. Jesus tells us as well in Matthew 6 that look at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and how they're provided for. And they're just birds and flowers. He does so much more for us because he cares for us. He cares for us more than he cares for all of this that he created. He didn't die for this. He died on the cross for you and for me so that he could be in a relationship with us, so that we could be provided for. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't going to be times in our lives when we're going to have legitimate concerns about where things are headed for us or for people we love, and certainly this is one of those times. But in Philippians 4:19, Paul talks to us about how God provides for us in all of our needs according to the riches that we have in our relationship with Jesus. And God's provision doesn't mean that we're going to get everything that we want and everything we need. Things may not always turn out the way we would like them to turn out. I mean, think about it. Paul wrote those words in Philippians when he was in prison. He was not in a great situation. But he knew that God would provide for him all that he needed in that situation. And that even in his moment of facing death, he knew, as Psalm 23 says, that God would walk with him and be with him through the valley of the shadow of death. And so, writing in the midst of prison, he's talking about how God will be there to meet our needs. And so he says we can rest and we can be still. Instead of worrying, we can pray. Earlier in that chapter, in chapter 4, he talks about how we don't need to be anxious or worried, but we can rejoice in all things and we can give everything to God in prayer. You know, not worrying is easier said than done, isn't it? The author Max Lucado said, however, that no one can pray and worry at the same time. And so when you and I are worried about our situation, God says, pray. Talk with me about it. You know, we as human beings typically choose worry more than prayer. I mean, it's natural to us. But can I encourage us to have our go-to be prayer instead of worry? The more we pray, the less we'll worry. And that will then help us to entertain healthy thoughts like Paul talks about there in Philippians 4, instead of all of the what-if scenarios that may never happen. And it will help us to live a life of gratitude as well. I have a really good friend of mine who recently spent a couple years in the state prison in Lansing, Kansas. And he talks about how he learned to stop the worry cycle that he was in there in prison. What he ended up doing was each day at the end of the day, he would write down in his journal 10 things for which he was grateful that day. And the next day he would do the same thing. And he would do that all 7 days of the week. And he would not allow himself to repeat anything for which he had been thankful the previous day. So at the end of the week, he had 70 things that he could look back at and think about how God had provided for him and those things that he was grateful for. Worrying is normal. And so let's strive to go against the norm. Let's instead choose to pray and entertain healthy thoughts and give God thanks for those blessings in your life and mine. Whenever we're tempted to be discouraged and to worry about something, pray, even if it means we pray 50 times a day. I mean, after all, it can't hurt to pray 50 times a day. What will happen is we'll find that our panic is turned to prayer. And as we're going to see from Pastor Jessica, it will also help us go from fear to faith.
You know, fear is really an interesting thing. Did you know that there's really 3 different types of fear? The first level of fear is protective fears. And these are what we do that are good and they're healthy for us. They protect us and keep us safe. It's things like right now, like social distancing, wearing masks and gloves, staying at home and washing your hands. These are good things. The second level of fear, these are the fight, flight, or freeze responses. And these are triggered when we sense danger. And right now, we're also living into this level of fears. People are responding 3 different ways. If they're fighting against these protective fears. I don't need to do any of this. I have my freedoms. If they're fleeing, they're going and withdrawing entirely from society, staying in their homes. If they're freezing, they're living within the rules and guidelines, but there is uncertainty, there is unrest, they are stuck, they look backwards at what could have been, and they don't know how to make sense of it all because there's no peace or understanding. And then the third level of fears is this fears of irrational belief systems and unexpected expectations. And these are ingrained in us since our childhood. And they kind of shape who we are and our identity. And when things go bad, they kind of rock and break out. So when our paradigms are broken, we're shaken to the core. And so right now, these fears we also are experiencing because we've kind of grown up with the general perspective of a certain way of life. We believe we had certain freedoms, a quality of life we can assume we have, an ability to control and manage our own safety. And what we have seen in the last few weeks is that we don't have as much control and these paradigms are breaking in front of us. So all at the same time, we are experiencing fear on 3 different planes, all at the same time as an entire nation. And so we're having to work through both these good and illogical fears, and we're trying to wrestle and grapple with what to do with them. But yet I'm reminded in God's word that God speaks and he continually intervenes and reminds us, do not be afraid. Did you know in scripture there are over 300 references to that? God is continually speaking to people saying, do not be afraid. Why is that? It's because fear is something that is continually impacting us and hitting us at all of these different levels, and it's really hard to fully separate from. We can never be fully free of fear. Even when we think we're on top of it and we can control it, all of a sudden it finds a way to creep inside of our lives again. However, the opposite of fear is trust. Trusting means we let go. It means we surrender. It means that we say we don't know and we can't manage and we don't understand what's going to come next. One of my favorite Bible verses is from Proverbs, chapter 3, verses 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. It's a great verse. It's a comforting verse. Yet it's extremely hard to live by because we like to lean on our own understandings. We like to lean on what makes sense and what is comfortable. And when we can't understand that, we look backwards at what we did understand and what we could understand because we like to control and manage what we can do, even if the things that we used to do are not the best or most life-giving options for us. I know as we read this passage in Exodus, it seems almost crazy that the Israelites are saying, let us go back to Egypt. I want to be a slave again. That made sense. That just doesn't even resonate with us. And yet for them, it was a place where they could understand. They knew what they had and they knew what they could expect. And now they were being called into an entirely new season where they couldn't understand. They couldn't make sense of it, and it seemed impossible. For them, their best way to manage their fears was to look backward. And I know I've been visiting with a lot of people on the phone in these last few weeks, and I've had some great conversations. And with almost everybody I've talked to, there's this affirmation of all the good that's come of it. You know, there's a slower pace of life. We've eaten more meals together as a family. We've eaten healthier. We've played more games. We've enjoyed conversations. We've reached out to people we haven't connected with in a long time. There's a lot of good. But I've heard almost every person in their conversation also say, I cannot wait until this season is over. In fact, honestly, who of us has not said, I am so ready for this to be over so I can begin my life again? I know I've said it. I can't wait to have some control over my schedule again, to have things put back in that I've enjoyed, that I've missed. And, you know, I know everyone knows that when we return out of this, it won't be exactly the same. But I think most of us, as we think about that, we think about this normalcy. It'll be a little different, but it'll be our old life with a little smidgen of a new normalcy put into it. And ironically, I think a lot of the things that we're wanting to go back to are not really great things. We're wanting to go back to busyness. We're going back to consumeristic temptations. We're going back to things that really are not good or life-giving. You know, God has given us a gift to move forward. But oftentimes we are easier to say, I want to go backward. You know, it's easier to be like the Israelites in this moment. For us to be waiting and crying out to God and say, let us go back. But I think this is a good reminder that God speaks to Moses in Exodus 14:15 and says, why are they crying out to me? Tell them to move on. The Israelites needed to move out of fear. They needed to move closer to the Red Sea. And we can't stop or settle either. We are called to move on. And in fact, I really wonder if God is calling us to an entirely different way to live. You know, I think sometimes we think God is calling us to a blending of our old and these new ways of living. But what if God is saying, I want you to move entirely new? To an entirely new season that you don't understand right now and you aren't going to understand right now. Will you trust me? And will you be willing to live a new season of life? You know, this kind of realization means that we have to trust and we have to take a step into the unknown. And that's hard. And it's scary and it's risky. But the good news is that God is with us. Think of the angel who came to Mary. When the angel said, "You're going to be carrying God's son," and she said yes, she trusted, not knowing what all lay in front of her. Do you think even for a minute she imagined that she would have God's son in a manger filled with animals? Not in the protection of a home with midwives carrying and protecting her in those moments? Do you think after the son was born that she would have to leave and flee and become a refugee in Egypt? She had no idea what was lying ahead of her. It was going to be hard and difficult. But she said yes, and she trusted, and God was with her. Think of Abraham, and of Esther, and of Ruth, of Daniel, of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In each of these people's lives, God calls them to difficult and to hard places. God rarely calls us to the comfortable or to the familiar. But instead, God calls his people to trust in his ways. They don't know what's going to happen to them. In fact, in many of these people's lives, they don't even know if they will survive. But they are willing to trust. And trust overcomes fear. As Christians, we are not called to look backward, but we're called to move forward. And that means we first need to begin naming our fears. We have to name and own where our worries are. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be worried. But what's not okay is to remain there and to remain stuck. We are called to take the next step and to trust. One of my favorite movies right now is Frozen 2. And I know some of you who know me are groaning because yes, it is Disney, but it's really less about Disney and it's more about some of the songs that are in Frozen 2. The songs and lyrics are incredibly different, and they're different than most musicals. They're powerful because they go into the human condition and address human emotions in areas that we often ignore or press down. For example, there's a song near the end of the movie that Anna sings. And at this moment, she is in a completely hopeless situation. She knows her life will never be the same. She's stuck in a cave and there is no way to get out. And typically, in most musicals, this is the time the protagonist sings an inspirational ballad. They begin to talk about how they just need to believe in themselves and they have the power within them and they can do great and amazing things, right? But that's not what Anna begins to sing about. Anna begins to sing and name the pain that she is feeling, the hopelessness that is in her. She recognizes that her life will never be the same, and it is hard and it is difficult, and she speaks of it. And then she speaks of a choice. She embraces the fact that she has two options here. She can remain stuck, or she can take the next step, and then another step. And she won't even know what each step will look like or how it'll be, but she can choose to continue to do the next right thing and do those steps. And if you haven't heard this song, I encourage you to listen to it. Google The Next Right Thing from Frozen 2 later on. It's incredibly powerful. And this song, Anna's situation, the Israelite situation, it's where we are. We have a choice. We can choose to live by fear, or we can choose to trust. If we choose to trust, it doesn't mean that we are going to understand what lies ahead, because we won't. If we choose to trust, it doesn't mean the next step is going to be easy. It most likely won't. But if we choose to trust, it means that we trust in God's plans, that they are good and He will make our path straight. We may not know where He is leading us, but we know it is the right path. A path that leads to green pastures, a path that will renew and refresh our souls. So today, before we close, I have a challenge for you. I want you to grab a piece of paper or a journal, or maybe even write a comment in our YouTube or Facebook pages. And I want you to process as the worship team leads us in a responsive song. Take some time to assess your current situation. Where are you struggling? I want you to name it. We all are having struggles right now. There is no one who is not experiencing some sort of fear or doubt or worry. Own it. Is it physical? Are you struggling with how to take care of your own health and soul during this time? Is it spiritual? Are you struggling with your relationship with Christ and how that is grounding you in this season? It is emotional. Are you worried about what the future lies ahead of you? We don't have all the answers. We don't know what lies ahead. but we can trust and take the next step. And so as the worship team is leading and responding, I want you to write, then my next step is, and I want you to finish that statement. What is the next step God is calling you to do? What is the next step you need to take? You know, God is leading us on this unknown journey, and it's like the Red Sea is in front of us. Are you willing to move closer to it? If so, God will make a way.
You unravel me with a melody, and you surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone, and I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. And love has called my name. And I've been born again to your family. Your blood flows through my veins. And I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. Sing that again. But I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I can walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescue me so I can stand and sing. I am a child of God. You split the sea so I can walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescue me so I can stand and sing. I am a child of God. Sing that again. You split the sea so I can walk right through it. My fears were drowned in perfect love. You rescue me so I can stand and sing. I am a child of God. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. And I'm no